This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have a major move that's happening in Congress right now that everybody should be paying attention to, and that is that the SAVE Act has passed the House. This is the voter suppression bill that you and I had spoken about just prior to it passing. Now that it's passed the House on its way to the Senate, we absolutely need to shine a spotlight on this. So, can you explain the implications of this bill actually advancing through Congress?
Yeah. So first, we need to start with the fact that this is just a massive voter suppression bill. This is the Republican wish list to make it harder to vote, to make it harder to register to vote. And this would result in millions of Americans being disenfranchised. So, like, that is what the bill does. We can get into the details of how it does that, but that is what this is about. It is also notable, by the way, that over the course of American history, it has always been the federal government that has made voting easier. It has been the states that have been the ones making voting harder. And this bill is historic in that it is really a rare instance of Congress affirmatively trying to pass legislation to restrict voting rights that the states have already given.
Right.
Right? We think about the role of the federal government as being the heroes of pushing back against Republican and other forms of voter suppression. But here, this is what the Republican Party has become today.
Can you talk about the specific provisions within this bill that are going to make it more difficult for folks to be able to exercise their right to vote?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We talked about the Trump executive order targeting voting a few weeks ago. This is kind of the legislative effort at the same thing. In
Yeah.
fact, I thought that maybe the reason why Trump issued the executive order was Republicans in Congress were getting cold feet about this bill, but apparently not. The main provision that is so wildly unpopular is a provision that says that U.S. citizens need to nevertheless prove that they are U.S. citizens in order to register to vote. And the only way to do that is through showing a birth certificate or a passport, or in some instances, a real ID driver's license. But the problem is most Americans don't have passports. Many, many, many Americans don't have their original birth certificate, right? This wouldn't work with a photocopy. It'd have to be the original.
Right.
And in particular for married women who have changed their last name, the birth certificate name won't match the name on the other document that they have.
Right.
And so they face the greatest risk of mass disenfranchisement, which is, of course, ironic for the Republican Party that claims family values to be disenfranchising
Well,
married women.
they claim family values, but this is also like from a 1950s nuclear family model where really it's the women who would be subservient to whatever the man wants. And so so there's this anachronistic view of the family, but then there's also the fact that if you look at the political breakdown, the partisan breakdown of males versus females, it's that women are much more predisposed to vote for Democrats than males would be.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about this bill, both in this provision, which would target women disproportionate to men. It would also target young, more harsh than older,
Yeah.
and also minority voters would be disproportionately impacted based on the numbers. So it's kind of a perfect voter suppression bill from that standpoint. But you look at some of the other provisions, like preventing ballots counted after if they are mailed but not received by election day. That also has a disproportionate impact on Democrats versus Republicans. So look, the Republicans have tried to spin this as somehow election integrity, which is just their word for voter suppression. But don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. This is a massive effort to change the playing field of elections in advance of 2026 because they know they are unpopular. They know that losing the midterm elections would cripple Donald Trump's effort to destroy democracy. And the only chance they have is to engage in massive voter suppression. And that's why this bill that you would not expect to be among the first pieces of legislation that think about it. You got tariffs. They're not doing any legislation about tariffs. You got all kinds of problems in the federal government now with the workforce and what DOJ has done. They're not doing anything legislation there. This
Right.
is what they're doing because this is the thing that they think will keep them in power
Correct.
come 2026. But you know what? The bill's not going to pass the Senate, and we're already. My team is already fighting them in court over the executive order. But this is just the beginning of what's going to be a long fight over voting.
I want to dig into that right now. The fact that your team is fighting them in court over the executive order. let's say, because we know that Senate Democrats aren't going to be able to give them enough votes to overcome that 60 vote threshold. What strength does Trump's executive order actually hold to be able to actually have some power in the event that the legislation doesn't pass?
Yeah. So look, Donald Trump issued his executive order, I think, both because he doesn't think the legislation is going to pass, but also because Donald Trump is obsessed with election nihilism and voter
Right.
suppression. Remember, you and I recently did an episode about an executive action that Donald Trump took against Chris Krebs
Yeah.
for the sole offense on Mr. Krebs's part of having said the 2020 election was not rigged. Like, this is what Donald Trump is obsessed with. So that is why you see not just legislation, but executive orders. But as you mentioned, we're challenging that in court on behalf of the Democratic Party. He would try to both impose a bunch of new restrictions, but also take over parts of the election system and put it under him and his political appointees, even though the Constitution is clear that our elections are run first by the states and that Congress has a role, but it does not give that role to the president.
Right. And by the way, he also knows that, look, every executive order is only as strong or enforceable as everybody's willingness to enforce it. And if there are Republican officials who are willing to enforce it, then all of a sudden it could be imbued with power that it wouldn't otherwise have. Because again, this is our whole system of laws is based on everybody's willingness to actually uphold some common idea of what they are. And if they're just going to be deferential to Trump as opposed to, reality, then we'll be in a situation where Trump can try and issue executive orders. And if people pretend that they have power behind them, then suddenly they have power behind them. You had mentioned something earlier about the fact that this law would require some type of photo ID. Passports are not free. Photo ID is not free. Driver's licenses are not free. And so, in effect, by virtue of mandating that we need photo IDs to be able to vote, how is that any different from a poll tax, which obviously we have prohibitions from requiring poll taxes to be able to exercise your right to vote?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But I also want everyone to recognize people don't get passports if they don't need to travel. So yes,
Yeah.
it is a type of poll tax. Yes, it is a cost. But there are lots of people who don't have passports because they literally don't have a reason to travel outside the United States. So why would you spend $1 for a passport? I mean, it costs $100, but why would you spend any money for a passport? Why would you even think to get a passport if you're not traveling outside the United States? And I also want to point out, Brian, on the birth certificates, it also typically costs money to get a certified copy of your birth certificate,
Yeah.
right? Because if you don't have, if you have to order it, there's usually a cost for that. And even if you order it, what have we learned about Donald Trump and his believing in birth certificates? I mean, the man came to power
Right.
over a lie that he told about Barack Obama's birth certificate.
Right. So at
And
the end of
Barack
the
Obama
day,
produced.
he produced it. So at the end of the day, all you have to say is, okay, you went through all the steps of abiding by this law. You went and got a certified copy of your birth certificate. We just don't think that's real.
Yeah, we
That's
don't think
it.
that's real. We don't think the passport's genuine. We don't think your passport was
Right.
rightfully issued. Marco Rubio decides, because he's the State Department issues passports. He doesn't think you should have a passport. I mean, this is the problem that I have with too many well-meaning Democrats and some independents is that we think the Republicans are on the level when they say, "Oh, just get a passport, just get a birth
Right.
certificate." Like, no, like they said, Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. Of course he was. They proved it. Then he produced a passport, a birth certificate. And you know what they said? Oh, we didn't mean that kind of birth certificate. We meant this other kind of birth
Right.
certificate. And the state of Hawaii is like, that other thing isn't even a birth certificate. Like, what are you talking about? We have produced the document that you required.
No,
So
the goalposts will move until they are in the parking lot. And so I guess my question for you would be, is there a scenario in which you would be okay allowing for the requirement of some type of photo ID in the event that this law is preceded by a law, for example, that says, every American has to be issued a free form of photo ID?
yeah, look, I think the issue with photo ID is that again, the Republicans moved the goalposts.
Right.
In the state of North Carolina, they instituted a photo ID law that essentially excluded university IDs and then made, the University of North Carolina, which is a state-run institution, and therefore their IDs would be a government issued ID,
Yeah.
made them jump through other hoops. You wind up with states that say, okay, you need a driver's license, but only a driver's license from our state.
Right.
I'm sorry. Why would a driver's license from another state not be proof of identification?
Yeah.
I mean, in what other aspect of our
Right.
lives do we
I,
say,
I guess
you're
I get you're completely right that if you give them we already know that if you give them an inch they will take a mile, and so anything that they're doing, knowing full well that they're operating in bad faith, if you codify some of this stuff, that is a permission structure for them to say, hey, floodgates are open, let's move forward with any voter suppression efforts we can by chipping away at this thing that we now have broader permission to do.
right. And I'll give you two more quick ones. So real ID, right? We're all about to supposedly have to have a driver's license that meets certain requirements. You know what they're going to say about that? Green card holders can have real IDs. So then they're going to say, well, those driver's licenses don't count because how do we know that you're a U.S. citizen and you're not a green card holder? And then finally, what was Donald Trump's first executive order? Trying to do away with birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
Why do we right now say that a birth certificate is proof of citizenship? Because of birthright citizenship. So
Right.
on the one hand, he's saying, oh, just produce a birth certificate. On the other, because it proves citizenship. On the other hand, he's saying, no, actually, birth certificate won't prove citizenship because of birthright citizenship. It's all a shell game with them. They don't want you to vote. If you are watching this video, odds are you are the kind of American Donald Trump doesn't want to vote. And so they're going to come up with some set of rules, some set of executive orders to prevent you from being able to vote and your vote from being able to count it. That is why I founded Democracy Docket, to provide accurate information, to make sure that you get the truth about what's happening to democracy and voting in court. But this is the Republican game plan.
And by the way, you have covered the SAVE Act and the implications of the SAVE Act extensively in Democracy Docket. So I'm going to link in the post description of this video the article to Democracy Docket where you can read all about this. This is especially important. Highly recommend that we raise our voices about this particular issue because, you know, to your exact point, this is Donald Trump's pet issue here, being able to restrict voting to anybody who isn't predisposed or likely to vote for Republicans. So again, check out the link to Democracy Docket, and please make sure to subscribe to Democracy Docket more broadly. This is exactly the type of fearless journalism that we should be supporting at a moment when so many members of the legacy media are abdicating their responsibilities. So I'll put that link right here on the screen, also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.